Cats versus dogs. A new study aims to end an age-old debate once and for all. More than 2,000 pet owners were surveyed across 3 countries. This is to find out whether people care more about cats or dogs. Well, the results are in, and CTV science and technology specialist Dan Riskin is here to show us what happened. So, before we get to the results, I was fascinated about the criteria that was used by researchers to measure how somebody actually cares for their pet.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I mean, so you can't just go out to a bunch of people and say cat or dog, because people who have cats are going to say cat, and people who have dogs are going to say dog. So what they did is they took a whole bunch of people who own dogs and asked them, how much do you care about your animal? And they did the same for people who own cats. And the kinds of questions they asked to drill down on that are, how much do you spend on pet insurance? How much would you spend at the vet to save your animal's life if there was an emergency? How much time do you spend emotionally connected to your pet? So a whole bunch of financial and emotional questions. And from that, they got a bunch of data for dogs, a bunch of data for cats, and then they could make what they thought was a fair comparison within each of the 3 countries in the study. They looked at Austria, they looked at Denmark, and they looked at the UK, and really tried to figure out which pet owner loved their animals more by this index.
Okay, so they followed the money. What did they decide? What did they find?
What they found was pretty interesting, and if people like to fight about dogs and cats and who loves which one more, this is going to throw fuel onto the fire. But in all 3 countries, dogs came out ahead. In Denmark, it was a huge difference. Cats are 18% behind dogs, but in the UK, it's much closer. It's about 5%, and then Austria is sort of in the middle. But for all 3 countries, people were willing to spend more money on their dogs. They felt more emotionally attached to their dogs than the people who had cats.
Is it now? Dan, I know because we're looking at money and numbers, is it because dog care is more expensive?
Well, this is one of the things that they did not correct for in the study. And there are 2 ways you can look at it. You can say, well, you got to correct for the fact that dogs cost more. You know, if it's a bigger animal, it's going to cost more for food. And so that's going to just set your sort of balance for how much you expect to spend for this animal differently. But on the other hand, that's the animal, right? And so dogs are bigger. And so maybe we do spend more money on dogs because, you know, as part of the reason we do spend more money on them is because they're larger.
Okay, what was interesting as well is this gap between the level of care for cats and dogs being the largest in Denmark, but very small in the UK. What factors did researchers say could be behind that discrepancy?
Well, so this is where I look at what the researchers say in their paper and what they say in their press release, and I look at the data and I see it a little bit differently. What they say is, you know, the UK, there are lots of cat lovers in the UK, and, you know, it's a country that sort of is famous for how much they love cats there, and so that's why the gap is so much narrower there than it is in places like Denmark, where the gap is much wider. But what I see is 3 different countries that really got fundamentally very different scores for their dogs and different scores for their cats. And so you could look at these data and say, well, people in Austria love their dogs more than the people in Denmark love their dogs. And so they don't go down that road, but the fact that there is variability between countries and you get a different number for dogs versus cats, and there's only 3 countries, I really think that if they expanded this out to more places, they would start finding places where the cats happen to come out ahead of the dogs. I think this is just maybe a roll of the dice, a coin flip in terms of which countries they picked, and that in some places, you're going to find that cats come out ahead of dogs.
Okay, so Dan, you've looked at the report and you've looked at the press release. So overall, what does this study tell us about how we care for our pets?
I think what it tells us overall is that dogs do come out ahead in general, at least in these 3 places in terms of how much we care for them. But really what it does point out to me is that there's a lot of variability between places, and this is just a summary for the whole country. And so you're going to find variability among families. So really the take home is if you've got a cat and you love your cat, then that's really all that matters. But across the board, people do find that they're willing to spend a little bit more for their dogs. And as a dog lover, I kind of like that result.
I often say about our dog, Zebby, he is my most expensive depreciating asset. Anyway, thanks, Dan.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.